Welcome to the Miss Rowe classroom. This session focuses on Chapter 2, The Address from Class 11 Snapshots. Please leave a like, subscribe, and share the video. The Address was written by Marga Minco, a Dutch Jewish writer. The story is set in Holland after the Second World War. It highlights the devastating impact of the Jewish Holocaust, during which millions of Jews lost their lives, homes, families, and possessions. The story follows a young girl who survives the war and returns to recover her late mother's belongings from Mrs Dorling. However, the journey evolves beyond the retrieval of material possessions, encompassing the confrontation of painful memories and the process of learning to move forward. Let's begin with the chapter. Several years after the war, the narrator arrives at 46 Marconi Street. She rings the bell and asks the woman at the door, "Do you still know me?" The woman opens the door only slightly and carefully studies her. She claims that she does not recognize the narrator. The narrator introduces herself as Mrs. S's daughter. Even after hearing this, the woman shows no warmth or recognition. Instead, she appears nervous and tries to keep the door almost closed. Mrs. Dorling's suspicious behavior immediately introduces an element of mystery. The partially opened door symbolizes her unwillingness to face the past. Moving on, the narrator suddenly notices that Mrs. Dorling is wearing her mother's green knitted cardigan. The cardigan immediately confirms that this is indeed the woman her mother had trusted. Mrs. Dorling realizes that the narrator has recognized the cardigan. Embarrassed, she hides herself partly behind the door. The cardigan serves as evidence that Mrs. Dorling still possesses the family's belongings. It also suggests that she has begun using them as her own. Mrs. Dorling asks, "Have you come back?" She admits that she believed no one from the family had survived the war. When the narrator says that only she survived, Mrs. Dorling becomes even more uncomfortable. She refuses to invite the narrator inside. She claims it is not convenient, and she quickly shuts the door. Mrs. Dorling's behavior suggests a sense of guilt. Rather than welcoming the rightful owner, she seeks to avoid any interaction. As she walks back to the railway station, memories begin flooding back. She recalls the difficult days during the German occupation. During the war, she had briefly returned home from a hiding place. Jewish families lived in constant fear of deportation. They believed they might lose everything if they were forced to leave. The narrator remembers her mother talking about Mrs. Dorling. Mrs. Dorling had suddenly reappeared after many years. She claimed she wanted to protect the family's valuable belongings. Every time she visited, she carried away more household items, including silver cutlery, antique plates, large decorative vases, crockery, and other valuables. She assured the narrator's mother that the belongings would remain safe until the war ended. The narrator's mother placed complete trust in Mrs. Dorling. She never asked for any written agreement because she believed friendship was enough. The narrator wonders whether her mother should have made some formal arrangement. However, her mother is almost offended by the suggestion. She believes asking for proof would insult Mrs. Dorling. She also appreciates the risk Mrs. Dorling appears to be taking by carrying their valuables through the streets during wartime. This memory reveals the mother's innocence and trusting disposition, which is ultimately betrayed. The narrator remembers the first time she actually saw Mrs. Dorling. She saw a woman with a broad back, a brown coat, and a shapeless hat. Mrs. Dorling was carrying a very heavy suitcase full of the family's belongings. Before leaving, the narrator's mother tells her she lives in Marconi Street, number 46. Remember that. The address initially symbolizes hope during the war, but later comes to represent painful memories. After the liberation, the narrator does not immediately visit Mrs. Dorling. She has no interest in recovering the possessions. More importantly, she fears confronting reminders of the family she has lost. She fears old memories, painful emotions, and the reality that her former life has disappeared forever. Here we need to discuss what hardships did the girl undergo during such a turbulent war period. The narrator experienced severe hardships during both the war and the post-war period. During the war, being Jewish, she and her family lived under constant fear of persecution during the Holocaust. She had to leave her home and go into hiding to survive. Her mother entrusted all their valuables to Mrs. Dorling, hoping to save them from confiscation. Eventually, the narrator lost her mother, her home, and almost her entire family because of the war. She also suffered the emotional trauma of displacement and uncertainty. After the war, she returned as the only surviving member of her family. She found that her childhood home and her family life had disappeared forever. Mrs. Dorling, whom her mother had trusted, refused to acknowledge or help her. Seeing her mother's belongings in another person's house caused deep emotional pain rather than comfort. She realized that material possessions could never replace the love, security, and happiness she had lost. Thus, the narrator suffered not only physical displacement during the war, but also emotional loneliness, betrayal, and the pain of irreversible loss after the war. Gradually, life begins improving after the war. The narrator notices that bread is available again. She has a proper bed, and daily life slowly becomes peaceful. As life stabilizes, curiosity replaces fear. She begins wondering whether her mother's belongings still exist. The narrator returns to number 46 once again. This time, Mrs. Dorling is absent. Instead, a teenage girl, Mrs. Dorling's daughter, opens the door. She politely invites the narrator inside while waiting for her mother. As soon as she enters, the narrator is shocked. Everywhere she looks, she sees familiar objects from her childhood home, including the Hanukkah candle holder, the woolen tablecloth, the antique tea set, the silverware, decorative plates, paintings, and many other family possessions. Yet something feels wrong. The objects seem lifeless. They no longer belong in this unfamiliar house. Here we need to understand objects alone are insufficient to recreate the warmth of home. Memories are intrinsically or innately linked to people rather than possessions. Another important incident from the chapter is the burn mark on the tablecloth. The narrator gently rubs the woolen tablecloth. She remembers a small burn mark that had never been repaired. When she finds it, memories become even stronger. Minor details often preserve the most enduring memories. The burn mark symbolizes the everyday family life that has irretrievably disappeared. Mrs. Dorling's daughter, unaware of the narrator's identity, proudly explains that the objects are antiques. She says they use them every day. She even mentions eating from the antique plates hanging on the wall. The girl remains unaware that these objects originally belonged to the narrator's family. She has grown up believing they are part of her own home. The narrator remembers helping her mother polish the silver. She recalls not realizing that the spoons, forks, and knives they had used every day were actually silver. She had become so familiar with them that she never noticed their value. The point being made here is, individuals frequently fail to appreciate what is consistently present. Curious and encouraged by the narrator's silence, the girl opens the drawer to show the silver cutlery. Before she can do so, the narrator suddenly stands up. She decides she cannot stay any longer. She hurriedly leaves the house because seeing the objects causes unbearable emotional pain. They no longer represent her family. They have become ordinary household items in someone else's life. Outside the house, the narrator looks once more at the address, 46 Marconi Street. She decides she will never return. She realizes that memories cannot be recovered through objects. She understands that people, not possessions, create home. Without her mother and family, these belongings have lost their emotional meaning. The narrator resolves to forget the address forever. She recognizes that material possessions cannot replace loved ones. The past cannot be restored, and healing is achieved through acceptance of loss and progression. The address that once symbolized hope now becomes something she willingly leaves behind. Now let's discuss, why did the narrator want to forget the address? The narrator wanted to forget the address because it had become a symbol of painful memories rather than hope. When she visited Mrs Dorling's house, she saw her mother's belongings arranged in a strange, unfamiliar setting. Although they were the same objects she had grown up with, they no longer carried the warmth of her family or home. Instead, they reminded her of everything she had lost during the war. She realized that memories are connected to people and relationships, not merely to material possessions. Recovering the objects would not bring back her mother or her former life. Therefore, she decided to leave her belongings behind and forget the address, choosing acceptance and emotional healing over dwelling on the past. Let's quickly go through the themes present in the chapter. The story subtly, beautifully, and succinctly depicts the devastating effects of war and the Holocaust, loss of family and identity, memory and nostalgia, betrayal and broken trust. It beautifully showcases material possessions versus emotional attachment, the impossibility of recreating the past. It highlights acceptance and moving forward, and healing through letting go. Now, another important question from the chapter is the address a story of human predicament that follows war? The address highlights the lasting emotional impact of war on human lives. The Second World War destroys the narrator's family, home, and sense of belonging. Although she survives, she is deeply affected by grief and loss. When she returns after the war, Mrs Dorling refuses to recognize her, showing how trust and relationships have also been damaged. The narrator realizes that material possessions cannot bring back loved ones or the past. By leaving the belongings behind, she accepts her loss and chooses to move forward. Thus, the story portrays the emotional and psychological struggles faced by war survivors. To summarize the chapter, Marga Minco demonstrates that memories reside within individuals rather than in material objects. The narrator realizes that although the physical belongings survive the war, the love, warmth, and relationships attached to them cannot be brought back. By leaving the objects behind and choosing to forget the address, she accepts that true healing comes from moving forward rather than holding on to the past. This concludes the analysis of Chapter 2, The Address, from Class 11 Snapshots. For further study, reference materials such as detailed study guides, literary devices, extra questions, themes, character sketches, and extract-based questions for Class 11 are available at mistroclassroom.com. In the next session, we'll analyze the poem The Voice of the Rain by Walt Whitman. If you enjoyed the content, ask questions, subscribe, like, and share the video. Please don't forget to hit the notification bell. Bye-bye.